In patch 3.26, I covered the absolute dominance of energy shield based defensive setups in the endgame meta, with the Trickster and Occultist making up over 20% of level 95 plus characters. In the case of the Trickster, this wasn't a rise to prominence, but rather a retaking of the throne following its dominance in the previous patch, 3.25 Settlers of Kalgur, where Trickster Lightning Strike builds were amongst the strongest setups for the league due to the incredible scaling potential for Energy Shield and the ability to ignore specific Tier 17 map modifiers, whilst also dealing incredible damage output. And even though the Trickster suffered a handful of nerfs in 3.26, it was still able to maintain the top spot for Ascendancy share, running a very similar setup in terms of builds, only with Lightning Strike being replaced by Smite. But for the Occultist, this was a different story entirely. This was a monumental rise to the top from obscurity in previous patches, and it was the result of the stars aligning, so to speak. The introduction of two very powerful new pinnacle boss uniques, Whispers of Infinity and Coiling Whisper, combined with an important buff to Vile Bastion, and these together provided the basis for the breakout build of the league, Forbidden Rite of Soul Sacrifice, a build that was able to put self-cast spells back on the map. But crucially, whilst these builds were very different on the surface, deep down they shared the same core philosophy: stack massive amounts of energy shield to obtain both defense and offense at the same time. For the Trickster, this was achieved via Ephemeral Edge, and for the Occultist, it was the transfigured version of Forbidden Rite. Now, going into patch 3.27, we were expecting a big meta shakeup due to some comments made by game director Mark Roberts in the previous patch's Q&A. And to be honest, I was left feeling quite underwhelmed by the 3.27 patch notes when it came to game balance. It looks like the endgame meta wasn't going to shift all that much based on the information we had at that time. But truthfully, I was wrong. The endgame meta in 3.27 has changed quite significantly, and this is the result of several key additions to the game, the most notable likely being Foulborn unique items, which have breathed life into build-making creativity in a way that we haven't really seen since the freedom of patch 3.22's tattoo system, which enabled incredible buildcraft by allowing you to transform notables and even keystones. But Foulborn unique items are enabling some of the strongest builds in 3.27, but they're not the only reason for the sizable meta shakeup. There were also a handful of crucial nerfs, especially to the Trickster, the most notable of which was likely the change to One Step Ahead, which was a massive factor in this Ascendancy's past dominance in farming endgame content, being able to effectively ignore Tier 17 action speed modifiers. But One Step Ahead was changed in 3.27 to now only provide a solution to action speed slows and no longer provide an offensive boost on top. And this, combined with the addition of several new ways to solve action speed slows that are accessible to all classes via bloodlines, has uprooted the Trickster from the top spot, leaving this Ascendancy in the middle of the pack when it comes to Ascendancy share for level 95 plus characters 2.5 weeks into the league. Meanwhile, for the Occultist, a similar fate was in store, with nerfs to both the Coiling Whisper tech that was responsible for providing a massive boost to cast speed for Forbidden Rite builds, and a nerf to Whispers of Infinity to make it provide much less flat energy shield, and if those changes weren't enough, both of those build enabling uniques are now uber boss drops from their respective incarnation bosses, making them harder to obtain, especially earlier in the league, and scarcer as a result, and the Occultist then finds itself in a similar position as the Trickster this league, sitting somewhere in the middle of the Ascendancy popularity share. Now, whilst the Trickster and the Occultist have fallen off sharply from patch 3.26 to 3.27, the Elementalist and the Necromancer are the biggest winners of this patch, with almost 30% of Ascendancy share between them for level 95 plus characters in Softcore Trade League for the Keepers of the Flame almost 3 weeks in. And the most impressive thing about the popularity of these two Ascendancies is the incredible build diversity making up the selection of builds between the two, which is a stark contrast compared to the previous league, which saw just a handful of dominant builds at the top. The Elementalist is a great example of this, with Fizz dot setups making up a quarter of those builds. There's also Eviscerate Ignite as a popular option, along with wand setups for Kinetic Blast and the new Kinetic Fusillade, and there's even Penance Brand of Dissipation at an impressive 9% of those builds, with Blade Vortex also sneaking in there, resulting from those buffs to Herald stacking setups. And this wide diversity of builds is a show of credit to the Elementalist Ascendancy, which just offers this incredible base to empower so many different build archetypes. And meanwhile for the Necromancer, there's a bit more dominance here for the Wander setups with Kinetic Blast of Clustering, making up about a third of the builds. And this is the result of the buff to Corpse Pact in 3.27, halving the ramp time for attack and cast speed. But there's still a diverse pool of minion builds coming in just behind, with Holy Relic and Spectre setups being the most popular of those. However, there's a notable trend here, and that is that whilst the Ascendancy share has shifted quite dramatically, the location of popular builds on the passive tree hasn't changed all that much, with that top area of the tree still being populated by the most builds. But that doesn't mean that those builds are utilising the same defensive mechanics. In fact, there's one big shift that's occurring this patch, and that's the significant decline of Chaos Inoculation, dropping from 36% of level 95 plus characters in Mercenaries League to 23% in Keepers of the Flame. And whilst CI is likely to improve its share a small amount over the coming weeks as higher budget builds come online, this is still a very significant shift, and it's representative of a larger change going on, because patch 3.27 had a lot of subtle changes to improve the balance of life versus energy shield, which has been skewed in favour of energy shield based builds pretty much since the introduction of tier 17 maps. The Keepers of the Flame update set out to address this issue by introducing new tools for life-based builds rather than heavy nerfs to energy shield. Some examples of this include the That Didn't Happen notable on the new Delirious Bloodline class, which provides incredible defense for life-based builds specifically, as this node cannot be used with CI. Then there's the Corruption's Embrace notable on the Chaos Bloodline class, which once again lends itself to life-based builds, providing everlasting sacrifice to incentivize utilizing energy shield only as a means to obtain additional maximum resistances. And on top of that, there's also Sacrifice of Blood, a heavy investment late game option for life builds. And there's more going on there with the other Bloodline classes too, with two new options to solve action speed slows in the All, the Crystal King, and the Farrell Bloodline classes. And elsewhere in the game, the Ephemeral Edge unique sword has moved to tier 0 unique rarity in patch 3.27, so similar to the aforementioned changes to both Coiling Whisper and Whispers of Infinity, that item becomes much more scarce as a result, and therefore is more difficult to access for a lot of builds. And even beyond those changes, a lot of the new unique items, both Foulborn and the new Breach items, are benefiting life-based builds specifically. For example, the Foulborn version of the Red Dream, which is being used by 7% of builds on level 95 plus characters. That's a lot. It's actually the most popular Foulborn item in the league. And this one makes modifiers to fire or all elemental resistances also provide increased maximum life at 75% of their value. Now there is an energy shield version of this over on the Blue Dream Jewel, but that one is much less popular at just 1% of builds. And part of the reason for that is that increases to energy shield are much more common, such as the Light of Meaning for energy shield, which provides increased energy shield per node, rather than the life version which grants flat life instead. So the Foulborn Red Dream is much more of a significant improvement to life-based builds compared to the Foulborn Blue Dream for energy shield builds. Now there's also things like the Foulborn Wrathpith Globe, which is enabling new life-stacking damage over time builds. I know that both Captain Lance and Waggle made cold dot builds with that one. And there's the new unique axe, the Grey Wind, which is essentially the life version of Ephemeral Edge. It allows you to stack life to obtain flat fire damage from the weapon, and this is just another new option for life-based builds. Now speaking of life-based builds, I must make an honourable mention for the Chieftain Ascendancy, which finds itself in the 3rd spot for ascendancy share for the 2nd league in a row, with approximately the same percentage share and the same builds being played. Righteous Fire remains as one of the most popular league starting builds for 3.27, and the transition of this class into a late game farming powerhouse in the form of cast when stunned setups has cemented its spot in the top 3 almost 3 weeks in. And another class and archetype that must be mentioned here is the Slayer and Slams. The Slayer has essentially swapped places with the previously more popular Berserker, going from patch 3.26 to 3.27, following the nerf to Volcanic Fissure of Snaking, with Ground Slam Bleed being the most popular slam setup for this class. Now, one of the last things I wanted to discuss in regards to the 3.27 meta in this video is the Juggernaut, and in particular the accuracy and intelligence stacking build that Paustron is playing, because this one is looking to be the big breakout build for 3.27. We can see that on day 1 of the league, almost 3 weeks ago, just 1% of the characters had ascended into the Juggernaut class, and by the most recent snapshot, almost 3 weeks in, this has risen to 7% of the ascendancy share. Now, half of those builds are strength stackers, utilising Replica Alberon's Warpath, which is a common endgame setup for the Juggernaut. But in this league, there's the Foulborn Hand of Thought and Motion, which grants increased accuracy per intelligence, and this item is providing the basis for possibly the strongest overall build of the league, an accuracy and intelligence stacking Juggernaut that's free to pretty much use any attack setup they want to. Most are choosing the transfigured version of Lightning Strike. Now, I expect more and more of these characters to show up, with Juggernaut becoming more and more popular as the league continues to progress, and this will contribute to that increase in share for Chaos Inoculation that I mentioned earlier, because these are energy shield based builds. Now, overall, the meta for patch 3.27 has shifted quite significantly, and life-based builds are the most popular they have been for the past 4 leagues. That's a result of very specific, targeted nerfs to overperforming energy shield stacking builds, but it also comes from the addition of many new tools to enable life builds in new ways, or support life setups in areas where they were previously struggling. Many of the rising builds for Keepers of the Flame are making use of important Foulborn unique items to either support or entirely enable their setups, which begs the question, what will happen to Foulborn unique items when 3.28 rolls around next year? I'd like to see them go core, but what about you? Do you think Foulborn items should go into the core game? And what are your thoughts on the endgame meta for Keepers of the Flame? Let me know by commenting below. Thanks for watching this video, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.